And I realized at that moment, I was going to be part of the war effort.
How has the inner dialogue of John changed now that you're giving someone this gift, really, like a good cup of coffee?
It is absolutely a slippery slope. So I had a rule, which was no porn, no politics. That was our rule. Otherwise, freedom of speech. I had a VC-funded company CEO come by and say, you need to have a number in your head. So when you hit that number, you get the hell out. Parents talk to their lawyer and they're like, we're going to get a big settlement from the police department for this, right? Never mind, they haven't paid the contract. They're about to go bankrupt. And they got a settlement and they bought a Porsche.
John, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I enjoyed reading about you online. Derek has given me some pointers or some ideas to talk about. And as I was researching you, I thought we only can start in one spot. Is it true? And I say, is it true? Because this is your story. I heard a story that you once got a phone call from the White House asking if your software is able to send an email at 2 a.m. To Iraq to start a war. If that's true, how did you find yourself in a situation like that?
I was really, this is in the late 90s, I was really into the precursor to social media, which is email discussion groups, what were called listservers. And there was this software called listserv from the old days, mainframe software. And if you knew how to access it, at the time, it was amazing. You could get an answer to anything, anywhere. I know this is now in the age of AI, that seems, but this is 20 years ago. And that was because there were about, I think, 15,000 groups of experts, not just people battling, but experts talking about every topic. And the frustration I had was that was amazing, but I couldn't get to it. So I decided to write some software called InfoMagnet, which was a Windows program for searching all that stuff. And that did okay, but I decided the real problem was the server. The server wasn't really sharing and doing that. So I ended up writing software called Lyris that was a global conversation about lots and lots of topics. And it did quite well. It did quite well because I had a very clear mission. We'll talk about that, but something I've not been good at in most projects. And eventually people like Britney Spears, not gummy bears, what are they called? Jelly beans, jelly bellies, and various elections were running on my software. In fact, at one point, 1/3 of the email on the internet was running through my software that I had written. This is peak because email discussions morphed into email announcements. And then email announcements morphed into the surveillance economy that we have now. And this was the very beginning of it, where people started putting tracking dots and everything inside emails. And I started this software because I was very idealistic. And I had my idol was Buckminster Fuller, who had this idea that the world had enough. The problem was politicians and inventors could invent things to make more with less. That was the main problem, was basically improving the world through design. And so I thought, could I have world conversations? I was looking at, for example, a war that happened. It was a short 1-week war between Uruguay and Argentina, I believe. That was called the Soccer War. And it was a big upset. And, machine guns came out. People were shot over a soccer game. And I thought, can we get people who are just soccer fans to talk to each other and become fans? And when they get together in other countries, go out for a drink instead of this otherness. So that was the goal behind Lyris. And Lyris, it's lyrical, it's supposed to be musical, harmony. That was the idea behind it. And so I'm doing this software, and I've got enough money from this. My goal, I had a VC-funded company CEO come by and say, you need to have a number in your head. So when you hit that number, you get the hell out. And he said that number, he thinks, was $3 million US. Because at $3 million US plus a house, if you own your house and you have $3 million US from interest, you never have to work again, right? You get your 5% interest, you make 150 grand a year, you get your 50 grand to taxes, you have 100 to spend, you're done. Get out, enjoy your life. But I hadn't done that. I hadn't taken this advice. So I was past that, but I was still thinking, I don't need this money. Instead, it's stressing me out. But as long as I'm making the world a better place, to quote Silicon Valley, I was good with that. But slowly what happened is my software, as it grew, I had to hire employees, and my employees didn't necessarily have my political views. And, they had mouths to feed. They had children who needed new Nike shoes. And you have a low spot, and so you start a low spot in sales, and you start morphing, and you just chase the money, whether it's the founder's goal or not. And I remember when Philip Morris called and they wanted to buy our software, and I said, no, we don't sell to cigarette companies. And what that taught the salespeople is don't ask the boss. Take the money. Once you took the money, he can't say no. He already took the money. And so, the White House was one of the customers had bought the software. And at the time, we had daytime tech support in California. And they called us and they said, we want to buy 24-hour tech support. And we said, why would you ever need that? And they said, well, just say, for instance, that we were declaring war on Iraq at 2 a.m. We need that email to get out. And I realized at that moment, I was going to be part of the war effort. And if I don't sell it to them, someone else will. But do I need to be the one who delivers the email saying that America's at war, helping war become more efficient? And I was at that point where I said, I need out. I need to sell this to somebody because I've lost control. And so there's that. That's the story.
John, so many amazing angles on the story here. I have a few points jotted down. You said that's the moment I lost control here, just at the end.
Mm-hmm. Because we were already down that slippery slope. We'd already sold to politicians. I remember, try to remember who it was who was, I remember the Republicans were using my software, and the Democrats were far behind. And it wasn't as polarized as it is now. But I thought both sides should have access to current technology. And so I wanted to donate the software to their side. And they took it, but they didn't know how to use it. The Republicans were far more sophisticated. And so I'll give you an example of what they were doing. The Republicans knew that they had to cast a broad net. And on the one side, they might have the religious right, and then they might have financial conservatives. And they knew that a lot of the people who vote for them would be pro-choice. So how to handle that? And the way they handled it is through a technology I developed where we tracked what they were looking at on the website, and we figured out their views. And when we sent a newsletter out, there'd be a half dozen paragraphs, and the paragraphs that we knew would turn them away would be suppressed. So each person was getting a carefully one-on-one crafted message from that politician, hitting their hot points, avoiding the things that would turn them off. Initially, that was developed to sell jelly bean flavors, but works just as well for political views too. So it's that's the slippery slope. I was way deep down in that already. And when you make, it's like, you make a weapon, it will be used, and it won't be used in the way that you necessarily think.
I can hear the tension in your voice that, like you said, you started this idealistic, you had a very clear mission, and you're just saying here, you started for jelly beans, and here you are using it for political reasons and potentially be part of a war. At one point, I wrote a quote here. You said, I was just chasing the money. Can you recall, or was it just all intertwined in the messiness of it all when it went from this idealistic John to where you found yourself, I lost control?
It is absolutely a slippery slope. So I had a rule, which was no porn, no politics. That was our rule. Otherwise, freedom of speech. And you can't do spam. If you do spam, we remotely disable your service. So I had a kill switch. So we were, that's one of the reasons we did well, is because our messages get delivered, because anyone who bought it who's a spammer got shut down. And what we do is slowly just get pushed a little bit. So it's like, so are you anti-porn? I'm like, no, but lots of people are like, okay, what about feminist porn for women run by women? I'm like, I guess that's okay. Okay. And then it's like, what about, and so I remember there was, in fact, a feminist porn company who bought the software and they were doing soft stuff for women. I'm like, yeah, I'm okay with that. And then it was like, okay, one little more. And it happens the salesperson I had was this beautiful, beautiful man. So the female porn stars loved talking to him. And he'd be at trade shows and like, let's go talk to him. And he was really good too. And so then he's like, let me see if I can get permission. And it was just like, okay, what about people asking permission? They like, I don't know. They're small men and they're Asian and they want small Asian women. Like, okay, it's a dating service. And you just keep getting pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed until one day you're not in a place you're happy with, but you made that happen. So I'll give you an example of what happened after this company is I created what I thought was going to be a fair trade music service. So with company Lyris, we slowly slid into this. And another aha moment for me was when I was sitting, having a drink with my programmers. And the joke came out that no one says what my company does when their friends ask. So they say, hey, what do you do? And they say like, oh, I work for an accounting software company. And that's like, that kills the conversation. I was like, why'd you do that? It's like, because they're going to say I work for a spam company. And I'd rather work for an accounting software company than a spam company in my friends' view. And it became incredibly hard to hire and motivate people because they didn't think they were improving the world. And it was embarrassing to their friends. So when I created the next company, which was a fair trade music company called Magnatune, it was really hard to find a lawyer who would put things into agreements that would screw me if I misbehaved. Because lawyers are like all about screwing the other side. Oh. I'm like, no, I'm going to put stuff in that if I do this, then I lose big. And so one of the things was like, well, I'm going to pay you gross revenue with no deductions. And he's like, you can't do that. What if you have costs? I'm like, then I suck it up. It's going to be no deductions. That way we never have a fight about this. And they'll always have the right, no matter what, the rights to the music, no matter what happens. I'm like, you can't do that. And I made it so anyone who acquired it would be obligated to follow all these rules too, which was a kind of poison pill. So no one would want to buy the company unless they had shared these morals as well. And so that was baked in. And the only way I convinced the lawyer to do it is I told him, I'm going to be able to pick up all these cynical, angry musicians who've been screwed about the music industry because I'm going to have a great reputation. This is going to be a competitive advantage. And he's like, oh, okay. So you're using high morals to cynical advantage. I get it. So that's what I ended up doing and baking that in. And to this day, no one's offered to buy that company.
Now, would you have changed that decision if you could go back to that moment in time?
No, because that was an anchor that I could, it caused every decision then to be tested against that. It's like, no, we can't do that. We just can't. Like we don't actually have the legal right to. So it didn't matter who I hired to run the business. It was written into the legal agreement with the IP holder. Can't do anything about it. So there was a requirement that you don't go back. It's a little bit like what OpenAI has faced, right? They have their corporate structure and they were supposed to be doing this thing. And the CEO got ousted because he started making decisions that were against the corporate charter that they had baked into the company itself. And that's, I think, why they did that. And OpenAI is a good example because they were able to recruit tremendous talent who wanted to use AI for good, as opposed to many other things AI can do. And now the story's been told. They've ultimately betrayed that for the cause of money. But you can see that is a good idea.
Yeah, I like this story because you share that, hey, as your company evolved and your values got tested, your morals did, and it's your words, a slippery slope. You're disclosing that, and you're disclosing that you're human. I think all of us, it's easy to be like, oh, I would never do that. But when you're in the situation, to your story here, it's slow to some point with all the little micro steps you described, and then you find yourself there. And we all have had that to some degree. Maybe not the White House calling us, but um, you 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 make me think about just the influence that money has here. You sold Lyris. Lyris, it was called the first. Yeah, for enough money, you don't need. Well, I don't know. You sold it for a lot of money. How has money changed you, if any, at all, since selling that company?
I already had enough money because I'd bought my house and I had more than $3 million in the bank. So I was already done. And my wife, now my ex-wife, was a musician and she just wanted to play music all day. So neither of us needed anything. We're living in Berkeley, California, which is a good place to be if you're an artsy-fartsy type. And you own a house. So I could afford all the steak I wanted. What I really wanted was less stress, more time to do other stuff. That's all I really wanted. But you've got this. First of all, you have 50 employees, and it's growing. You got to feed it and grow more. And then when it's starting to fall apart, well, I can tell you what happened. Is when you're growing, everyone's working hard, and when you start to contract, everyone has babies. And suddenly you're in the situation where you might have to lay people off who are new parents, and that's not something I can do.
Yeah.
And that's when you take whatever money you can, because it's like this somewhat iffy thing. New parent, with a 6-month-old. And that's what you do, right? I mean, parents will always do what it takes for their family. So that's the situation I was in. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It does. It sounds like a lot of this wasn't a massive chase for money. You just had this idealistic view. I'm curious. We all get imprinted and influenced by our upbringings, our neighborhoods, our parents, what they said, they didn't say about money. These are like unconscious scripts that were given. When you were, I guess, growing up, what was money to you? Did you ever think about money is?
Point I want to make about the question you just made, which is when you're first starting a company, unless you've got a bunch of VC, you're cash constrained. You're really, because that's your run rate. When you run out of money, that's it, game over. And as I was building the company, there were so many situations where I had to make do without good tools. And tools can be literally like a computer that's fast enough, or it can be a good salesperson. I just had to do with a slow computer. I had to write my own software instead of licensing it. I didn't have good salespeople. And after struggling with really slow growth rate because of that, I said to myself, the next time I do a business, I'm going to just find the money and buy the right tools, because the tools are years off my life. Like when I have to do without a good salesperson, or I have to write my own software because I couldn't license the good stuff, that's years I spend on something that I could have saved. And so that was what I was most frustrated about, coming out wealthy, but it took, I think 14 years in the end, and it should have been 7 or 8. So that's the biggest thing about having a bit more wealth is at the time Lyris was ending, I was a big metalhead, and I was also into classical music and new age, weird group of things, and they were all falling apart. The major labels were banning all of them. So like all this 80s heavy metal was just being dropped. The new age stuff was going away, and classical went from 20% of the market to 1% of the market in a 20-year period. And I was like, I have the money to maybe solve this. I'm going to pick up all these musicians. I'm going to do a fair trade deal, and we're going to go direct. We're going to embrace piracy. We're going to embrace the internet. And I'm able to fix this big problem of musical diversity. And I had a budget in my head, which was like, I think it's going to cost me $1 million to launch this. And 10 years earlier, I could have done it for 10 grand. But I said $1 million because it's like, I'm going to set up the servers, going to hire the employees, and go on a tour, get the music, do the publicity, hire a PR agency. And I did launch it with $1 million. And I was on page 1 of pretty much all major media with this thing. It was amazing. And so that money did buy years off that struggle. However, it did have a very high price, which is it led me to have something that was actually not market optimized, suddenly having a ton of visibility. So it was a kind of poor offering. It wasn't what the market needed at the time, but the story was good because I had a good PR agency. And so it took years of me having all this visibility but poor sales to finally figure out what the market wanted, which was actually just access to music. They didn't want downloads. They didn't want to curate. And of course, we all know that now. Everyone wants a cloud they want music as utility. That's what they wanted. But I didn't offer that. I didn't know it. So there's the two sides, which is I had enough money. And so I launched before I had product market fit. Whereas Lyris, I struggled for years. And when I finally had enough money, I had product market fit and then did really well. Okay. Your question about parents is a really good one. And it's one that's probably the opposite of most people, which is I found my parents at about age 10 were addicted to money. And I remember how we were close to bankruptcy. They had bought 2 houses and renovated them themselves. And there'd been a huge storm in California. So one of our houses had slid into the road. So they were close to bankruptcy. And one of our contractors had sued us, and the cop to deliver the summons had broken into the house while we weren't there. And that's bad. They're not supposed to do that. And so my parents talked to their lawyer, and they're like, we're going to get a big settlement from the police department for this, right? Never mind, they haven't paid the contract. They're about to go bankrupt. And they got a settlement, and they bought a Porsche, right? Facing bankruptcy, they buy a Porsche, a used one at least, but it's like, what? What are you doing? You're just, and they were happy for a while. Like that Porsche made them happy. And I was like, this taught me a huge lesson, which is like, I am never taking on debt, and I am never spending money until I am clean. And that has been an absolutely guiding thing for me. So for my mission in life, it was like, I'm going to take an occupation where I can always get a job. So I'm a coder. The world always needs a coder. Doesn't matter how boring it is. Initially, I worked for an insurance company, right? Hospital insurance, super boring, pays well. And the thing is, once you can do that, you can get a job anywhere on the planet, right? Insurance claim processing. Everyone needs to hire that. And then I would take whatever money I had, launch a company, and if it fails, I can just go back to insurance claim processing because I've only lost the money I saved. I'm not in the hole. So I feel like that negative lesson from my parents of the addiction to money and debt is the single biggest thing that led me to become eventually somewhat successful.
Thank you for sharing that. In my world, we call that a financial flashpoint. So a memory that's ingrained into our emotions, the way we still can feel it. I when you said that Porsche, I kind of felt it through the screen all the way from Hong Kong. What do you think was underneath it? Was it like a sense of I want security and safety when you're looking at no debt? And you mentioned you had $3 million in a house paid off at a relatively young age.
You mean what's behind? Tell me more. I don't quite understand the question.
Yeah. What do you think was underneath that drive? Was it a sense of I want safety, or were you scared never to be like that again? Or do you think it was just what it is, that I just don't want to be like my parents? I want to be.
So my father was a talented, smart guy, and he had been the head of Singer Sewing Machines Europe, and then the CFO of Singer Global, but he was never given the lead role, and he'd complain about that a lot. And no one's ever going to give me a company. That's why I want to lead. I'm always part of the team, second fiddle. And what I was hearing was, I don't have the courage to lead. No one's going to give you leadership. That's what I heard. So I wanted to make sure I went off and did it. And in fact, so I refused my parents giving me an allowance because I wanted to go make the money. And at age 13, I started writing software. At the time, it was called shareware. And I sent it to magazines. Magazines would include a free disc or a CD-ROM later. And there were various programs, and I paid my way through college. So by the time I hit 18, I'd gotten $100,000 in donations from shareware. So I didn't need that. I wanted that autonomy. And I also knew that I could just go do it. I didn't have to ask permission.
You're a resourceful individual. uh, um, I'm curious here on this idea of money. So your parents, they get this settlement, they buy a Porsche, used one. Here you are watching, learning, deciding you're going to pursue a different path with money. How did you curb, if any at all, this idea of enough? I know you mentioned your inspiration, Buckminster Fuller or
Fuller,
Fulton?
Buckminster Fuller.
Fuller.
Yeah. He invented
I
the
love that.
geodesic dome,
Right.
but
And you
different
had said that
conversation.
the world has enough. Politicians want more. So my
The world
mind's
has
going around this
enough.
enough.
Yeah, with the world can make do. The problem is getting it to the right people who need it, not wasting it. All this strife that politicians create. So I'll give you one example that he invented, and this was really influential to me, which is there's plenty of energy when there's daylight. You've got lots of sun and lots of generation capacity. You've got dams. The problem is that we don't have a need for it in the evening. So what if we had a way to get electricity from the other side of the planet? Then our problems just go away. Because electricity or other power is the main driver behind economies. That's what makes economies productive. So what if we had a way to get superconducting wires from Russia and China, and we pumped it both ways? He had this law, which is the law of McDonald's, which is no two countries with McDonald's have ever been at war, and it's even true when the UN was bombing Kosovo. The troops were there keeping McDonald's open. and it's true. So it's true. And I think it stopped at some point, maybe 20 years ago it stopped, but it meant that economic ties make war impossible.
Right.
And so I was thinking, okay, we solved two problems here with this thing. One is, a bunch of them. One is get cheap electricity, create more stuff. Secondly, war is impossible with someone who's supplying you power and vice versa. So let's go do this. Let's do the world energy grid. And, Europe, to some extent, has done that with the European energy grid so that European nations can't go to war with each other. They're too dependent on each other for power.
Yeah. I guess when we're relying on each other for
Our
money,
welfare,
the economy.
our welfare is tied to each other. An economist that I worked for as an intern when I was in college said, he's a Polish economist. He said the most important thing is people traveling and making babies. When they make babies with foreigners, then those connections create, and then war becomes impossible because you get the babies, you get trade, and that's that.
We just got to encourage more people to go travel and a couple more limoncellos. I hear you make a few of those, and
so
have some babies.
You're not going to see or you're not going to hear is I have an American accent, but English is my second language, and I grew up in France till I was 10, and I didn't speak any English at all. And at age 10, I came to the U.S., and it wasn't until I was 16 that I got rid of my French accent, and it bred into me the feeling that even though I'm a white guy with now an American accent, I felt like an immigrant. And so I've always had an affinity for other immigrants, other people who struggle, other people who have to make their way. No one makes a job for you when you're different. You got to make it happen. And so that's made it possible for me to go to some place like Hong Kong where I have to go to the immigration department. Right? I'm an immigrant. And get a visa or wherever I am, the UK, other places, and feel comfortable there. So generally, I've also felt comfortable and I've been successful places where there's a lot of immigrants, whether it's, for example, the New York area or California or Hong Kong or London. I like that multitude of voices.
I was queuing up a question about enough, and your comment here about being an immigrant made me bring it back into my ways of thinking here. That it seems as you made your money, you didn't take it for granted that like I've got all this money, and the way you explain being an immigrant, you know, there's no free lunch, so to speak, as you're saying. Do you think your worldview, living in Europe and then coming to Canada, that's where I'm, US, at 10 years old, do you think that informed your ability to some degree to say, okay, I have enough and not to continue to want more and more and more.
The joke I tell is that I've got the moving quality outlook of a Frenchman, but the the business acumen of an American. And thank God it's not in reverse, the business acumen of a Frenchman and the quality of life of an American. So yes, very much that. The reason I'm in the business I'm in now, which is making high-end espresso machines, is I wanted to do something that I knew touched people. And you're at your most vulnerable when you wake up, you have your first sip of coffee, and if it's something delicious, your day's going to go a bit better. And the very first record I bought when I was, 10 was Steve Martin, Comedy Is Not Pretty. And I remember watching an interview with him, and they said, "Why did you go into comedy?" And he said, "Is it such a bad thing to make people laugh? That's a pretty good goal in life, just to make people laugh, improve their day with a laugh." And so my version of that is it so bad to just give people a better coffee in the morning? And that's a pretty simple goal to go with. And even better, can you give your partner a good coffee too, so they start off a little bit better and you've given a gift? Those are sweet things, and they're very motivating. It's what, when I started this company, I didn't need any more money, but I wanted to create something that touched people, especially since I felt I was still, so I would just hit my 40th birthday. I was still technically relevant, like my coding chops were still okay, but I had the entrepreneurial skills, having formed and sold companies. So I was like, I think I'm at the peak. And I think in 10 years, my coding skills will start to decline, my connections will start to age. And like, this is the time for me to take something that as a 20-year-old or even a 30-year-old, I wouldn't dare, like taking on billion-dollar Italian families. But now, like, if it fails, it fails.
Two things here. It sounds like the way you're smiling talking about this is a very meaningful pursuit, a meaningful venture for you right now.
Another key vector for why I think I've been successful is because I wasn't too smart. And as a programmer, you encounter really smart people. And two things about really smart people. One is what nature gives, nature takes. And I find the smarter you are, the more you're going to have other problems, right? You're going to have health problems, sociability problems. So that's the first thing, which I didn't have in excess because I'm not too smart either. But the other thing is that very early on, you butt up against your limits, and either you're a limited person or you find a way around them. And so just even as a teenager, I started to do what's called outlining, right? So a hierarchical organization of my thoughts, and everything I worked on, I started to outline. And that made my brain bigger. That was my secret weapon. And so when I started to hire people, I hired people who were smarter than me, but they still need me because they've got these other things. And so it's like, so how do I create a project that 10x's me? So let's say the task I've got is 100 in some arbitrary measurement, difficult. The smartest people in the room might be 20s, and I'm a 10. But that's still not good enough to do the 100. But if I can get a whole bunch of people working together, we might hit that 100. So that was the key for me, is like, how do I do that? And so this coffee project was the culmination of a lot of stuff, because I also worked in civil liberties for the EFF and also Creative Commons. And I wanted to create a project where I could recruit people, both paid and not paid, where they would believe in this mission. And in order to do that, I had to take my own money, struggle for a number of years to make something that was compelling enough to make talented people want to come, and then figure out how they get rewarded and they stay. So that's my job, is like, get it to that first stage, and then that. Now I was wrong. It turned out to be more complicated than that, because it turns out each stage is different. So those talented people who come might be really interested in, let's just say, to use a practical case, they might be interested in coffee research. But after a few years, the coffee research is done. Now we're in the stage of disseminating that research. So now I need other people to come in, and I need to change the offering and get them interested. So that's very clear in my mind, as that's my role, is to attract those talented people, and reward them and keep them. And the open source aspect showed me that you can get far better talent unpaid than paid. But it's harder. It's really easy to write a check.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Sean. I know I'm breaking into the conversation just for a moment. There's good reason. If you're here, it means you care about living with more purpose, more meaning, and deeper connection. And that's exactly what the You Potential podcast is all about. When you hit that subscribe button, conversations like this, the ones that challenge you to think differently and open to new possibilities, keep showing up to you every week. And when you share this episode with someone you care, you're not just passing along a podcast. You're giving them a chance to reflect, to grow, and maybe even to reimagine what a good life can look like for them. So please take a second, subscribe, share it with a friend. Let's spread the conversations that truly matter. Now back to the show.
I guess so. Earlier on, you talked about how you had a clear mission. And then you made a comment. You're like, not so much after. It sounds like you have a clear direction right now in how you're hiring, your role in Decent Espresso, which seems to help build this company. And you're doing it. You're being competitive. You've built a good company here.
Looks like it.
Yet again. Yeah, looks like it. Taking on these billion-dollar families.
Yeah, I haven't compromised. I mean, the last time I made a company this big was Lyris, and it played in a different space, and it was purely virtual. It was just software. And so your profit margins are crazy, which you don't have when you sell hunks of metal. And so you can pay crazy salaries. You can be in California. You can be kind of stupid with money. I mean, Google's incredibly stupid with money. It doesn't matter.
Lots of people can be stupid with money. The name here, Decent Coffee, or Decent Espresso.
Yep.
I imagine the taste is much more than decent.
It's not that.
Where'd that name come from?
What it was is, I mean, right, the word brag is bragaggio. It's Italian. There's a reason it was invented by the Italians, right? And I was living in San Rafael. I was looking for a name for what I was doing. And in fact, if you Google, you're in a city and you're like, oh, I want to find a good coffee shop. You say, where can I find a decent cup of coffee, right? That's the expression. Not like, where can I find the best coffee in the world? I just want a decent cup of coffee. So I'm living in San Rafael, which is, a nothing suburb of San Francisco, kind of sad, 1950s to 70s, hollowed out. And there's a coffee roaster there with an Italian name. And it says, the best roast coffee in the world. And I'm across the street and I made this gesture involuntarily at it. And I was like, come on, you're in San Rafael. Dial it back. Like, best coffee in town, maybe, a really good cup of coffee. But do you really have to be that arrogant? It's not credible. It's obnoxious. It's like, you know what? And it just came to me. I'm like, all I really want, is like a cup of coffee that warms me and I feel good. And I go, that's good coffee. Maybe it wasn't, but it's what I needed at the time. And I was like, that's that. And I'm sick of companies marketing to me. And so I'm going to go for decent. I'm going to go for acceptable. And if it's more than acceptable, I shouldn't say that. My customers have to say that because otherwise it's BS. So I got a lot of pushback on that. They call it the shit sandwich espresso. Lots of not very good. In fact, so I just ran with it. So at trade shows, we've got this banner. It's 3 meters tall. What is that? That's tall.
Yeah,
10 feet tall. And in big, huge words, it says, "I've had worse." Right.
Oh, that's good.
And people walk by. The first time we had our booth, it was in New York at a huge convention. All the towns are there. It's like best, most leading, most innovative, passione. And they walk by and they're like, yeah, sure, make me a coffee. That's really funny.
Yeah.
I've had worse. And then they'd sip it. They're like, I've had worse. Yeah, I've had worse.
Yeah.
It's actually pretty good. How? And
You're setting the bar kind of low and over delivering.
Yeah, it's not for me to tell you. And in fact, you probably have had like the most amazing coffee of your life elsewhere, and I'm not going to deliver that. But you've also had a lot of bad coffee in your life, and wouldn't it be nice every day to have better than that?
That, you know what? I love that. John, coffee's so good. I absolutely love coffee. And I like this, how you're talking about you want to like give something people can have. Those weren't your exact words, but that's the sentiment that I got from you, as opposed to, I guess, your earlier comment about spam.
Sell more stuff, right? When I'm sending out email, I'm just
more stuff.
Sell more stuff. I don't want to do that.
How has the inner dialogue of John changed now that you're giving someone this gift, really, like a good cup of coffee in the, not even the morning, any part of the day?
Yes.
The smell, the first sip, this is what dreams are made of. How has the inner dialogue changed at all?
So the first thing I figured out was this was already a solved problem. I won't name the company, but for about $1,000, you could buy a machine made of plastic that made you actually a quite acceptable cup of coffee without a lot of knowledge. And I was like, whoops.
John, I think I have one of those upstairs.
Yeah. I was like, whoops. And then I looked at the size of that company and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to beat their price. And in fact, a guy who'd been down that journey showed me and sold machines that were like $100 less than that machine. And he's like, that's as low as you can go. And I was like, okay, whoops. But I do have a model for all the companies that have been successful. And because there's a basic problem. It's like you're entering a field that you're not the expert. And so what I try to do is I find an expert in that field and I say, imagine I'm your in-house software company. What do you want? Like, what would you want as the best as in this field? So like I went to, when I was building an anti-spam product, I went to telcos. I'm like, what would you want to block spam? And one of them said, we'd want this. I'm like, okay, I'm going to build that. And then once I built it, they started talking about it to everybody else, and it made the product. And it's the same thing with Lyris. I went to the guy who ran what's called the List Mom group. So all the people who ran email discussion lists had their own list called List Moms group. And I said, what do you want? The guy at the list mom of list moms. He's like, I want this. And they don't promise to buy it, and then I give it for free at the end. But since I made the product for them, they're like, yeah, it's free and you tailor-made it to me and you're going to keep making it for me. I'll do that. And then, so it makes a product that the market needs. And secondly, it gets the word out. Right. So that's a secret sauce, but it requires you to be humble. And that isn't a common property among startup founders.
I know what you want. I know what you want. That's great. What do you want?
Yeah.
I mean, simple, but
yeah. What do you want? What is missing in this? You're the expert. So I found this guy, Scott Rayo. He'd written a bunch of books, and I had 2 or 3 other people who'd said yes already. And he said, yeah, I'll be your guru. And then he called me back the next day and he said, I just found out you've got 3 other people. He said, John, you don't know enough to choose among 3 experts. You're arrogant to think that you're going to get 3 pieces of advice and pick which one is best. I'm not playing ball. You need to pick one of them because any of those is better than you. And so bye. and I said, Scott, you're right. It is arrogant for me to have 3 advisors and I listen and I choose which one. If you come on board, you're the best of the bunch. I'm firing the other 2. I'm just going to do what you say. And he kind of went silent. I went, okay. And this guy had written a half dozen books on coffee. He's the world's leading authority on coffee roasting. And I became his underling. And all it took was, me spending millions of dollars to create the product he needed. So the quick answer to your question is, I did the product that Scott Rayo wanted. And what Scott said is, if you buy dark roasted beans that taste chocolatey, there's a machine out there that does it for $1,000 that makes good coffee. That's not the problem I want to solve. Coffee has moved on from that, and they're now buying more expensive beans that are lighter roasted that taste of something besides chocolate. And the Italians make espresso machines that taste like chocolate, and no machine exists that properly deals with this new kind of coffee bean. And that's what I want you to make. I want you to do that. And I'm like, okay, well, how do you make good coffee from what are called light roasted beans? He's like, we don't know because the machines never existed. I'm like, okay, so there's two problems here. First problem is research. Is like, I got to make a machine that researchers start using to figure out how to even make this coffee taste good. And once they figure it out, I got to take what they learned and turn that into a product that normal people can use to make good coffee from light roasted beans. I'm like, okay. And that was that's an interesting problem. So that's also, I think, why people haven't tackled this, because there wasn't an obvious product, right? It was like, first spend $3 million to please 10 researchers. Now wait 5 years.
No, I need it quicker. So when you're approached with something like this, what's your orientation on? Are you excited? Are you thinking like, oh, okay, maybe I'll go back to this retired life?
No. So in fact, this is exactly, to go back to an earlier question, why do you need more money? Exactly for this reason. Because no VC would give me money for this problem. This is a bad idea, right? You got billion-dollar companies that already solve this problem. People give comfortable, you can make comfortable espresso at home for $1,000, and you want to try and solve this new problem that's never been solved. It's for a specialist audience that's not even clear on you. It's even taste good. No, I'm not going to invest in that. But like, well, I looked at what I had, and I had some money in the bank. I'm like, and I said, I'm going to spend all my money until I hit $3 million in the bank, and I still own a house. I got down to 2. And I was like getting nervous.
$2 million left.
Yeah, and the house.
Back to where you started before Lyris.
Yeah. So I had in the bank is $2 million, but it's like, oh, but I can still make that work. But then I was like, I need to stop spending. I need to sort this out. And then COVID happened, which was in our case great because everyone wanted to make coffee at home. So we got real lucky with that. But that's why, especially if you're in your 20s or 30s, you got your $3 million, you got the house. Why do you want more? You want more because you can now be master of your own destiny. And what I guess what I want to say is to the people who might be in that position is, once you have that money and you have the technical chops or the sales chops, and you also don't need VCs, or the VCs will do what you say, now you can tackle hard problems that humanity usually doesn't tackle. That's pretty interesting because you don't need the money. And also, that 20-year-old you didn't have the business chops and the ability to raise money. So now at 30, 40, 50, you can take on, I don't know, renewable energy or something that no one wants to invest in.
We often hear people say, does money buy freedom? And at times it could be a contentious thing. However, it does. And it's not, freedom isn't in this statement doesn't universally mean the same thing to everybody. In your case, I'm hearing this is a sense of freedom, the money that allows you to, as you said, tackle these problems that otherwise wouldn't be.
Right. So you've got 2 levels of wealth. The first is when you can own your Prius and go to Whole Foods and buy anything you want and not think about it. Right. And that's huge. That's huge. Like, yeah, I'll have the nice steak instead of, I think I'm having chicken again. That's massive. And then the next one is like, if I had time, what would I do with my time? And then not having, but I can't do that because I need money to do that. So most of my projects for years, I didn't have the savings. And so it was like, I had I'd make $100,000, $200,000, $300,000. So I've had about a dozen companies, and most of them either failed or make a couple $100,000. And so they're enough to start the next thing, but they're not enough to hire anyone. And that money goes pretty fast. So everything I did was always like, what can I do that requires nobody else? And that really constrained what I could tackle. And it basically kept me virtual.
Did that constraint to some degree create more creativity inside of you?
Yeah. So after Magnatune, I was reading a quite trendy book, and it's going to come to me what that one was. But I was reading the appendix, and it listed all these books that the author had cited. And I started looking. I was like, I'm going to buy all these books. This was a great book. I'm going to buy all these books that he's cited. And I started searching, and so much of what he'd cited was gone. Like, I couldn't buy it on Amazon. I could get it maybe on ABE Books, but even then it would take a long time. I'm like, wow, these books are a decade old and they're gone. And I made a little chart of the print run and how quickly it went away. And I came up with a more or less universal rule, which is the half-life is 1 year of a book, which is you print 100,000 copies, next year is 50,000, da, 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 da. And so very quickly you get to there's no books out there, right? And I was like, I might be able to solve this problem. And I have a whole bookshelf of books. Like, why am I buying books? And I can't find people who want these books. So I wanted to solve that problem. I created a website called BookMooch, where for every book you gave away, you got a book. And I explicitly made it non-commercial. It's like there's no fees to use this site. The only fee you pay is you post a book, but then someone else posts a book to you. I didn't make any money. And because I had that ability, because I had a couple $100,000 in the bank, it did really, really well because everybody else had to ask for money to do their things. And so that was a massive freedom to be able to afford the Prius and Whole Foods, and also to create like this clever thing. So initially it was called Never Buy a Book Again, was the subtitle. Because like you just give books away, take them.
Great one.
And it was huge, right? So it got the slogan for it. It wasn't mine. It was the independent, I think, paper called it BitTorrent for books. And the three biggest sites for books on the internet were Amazon first, Powell's, me, and then BookMooch. So I was over 1 million books a month. 10 million books a month was the peak we were doing in terms of trading. And so it was bonkers how many books were flying all over the globe because of this. And Amazon threatened to sue me 3 times. They did not like that I existed. I had something called the Mooch bar, which modified when you went to Amazon. So any book you saw, you could add it to your Mooch list and get it for free later on. They did not like that.
I mean, as I was reading about this company, I just kept thinking about how many books, like even myself, like to your point, I read them once, maybe twice, and then they
it's market
dust.
failure.
Yeah,
it's market failure. You have a book, and if you like that book, you can't throw it out because you're emotionally connected to it. The only thing you can do is give it to someone who wants it. And how do you find that person? It doesn't exist. That's total market failure.
If you did.
Yeah.
If you did, giving a book to someone always feels good. So, okay, the Amazon tries to sue you. Are they successful?
No. Every time I just wrote back and said, well, if you proceed with this, then I'm going to Google. And 3 times in a row, they just back down. Silently. I never heard again. I think you get this lawyer letter and you're like,
yeah,
because it's what they'd had is I was using their data feed of books, and they are making it more and more restrictive what you could do with that data feed. And they're like, this is misuse of our data feed. I'm like, okay, fine. I'll stop using data feed. I'll use Google's feed, and I'll point to Google Books for everything. They're like, he's doing 10 million books a month. And they wanted that money until eventually what happened is, they end up getting quotas at Amazon for how many accounts they canceled per month. And they just canceled it. They didn't sue me, but they canceled the data feed to it. Even though I was selling millions of books. I was shifting millions of books, but also people were. So one of the things that would end up being my revenue model for it was you'd make a list of all the books you'd like to get for free, but I tracked the daily price, which you're not supposed to do, of the used book on Amazon. You're supposed to destroy that data every day. That's part of the terms of service. I didn't. So I showed you a chart of all your books, and you could put a trigger in and say like, hey, tell me when any of the books on my list are less than 10 cents. And boy, Amazon did not like that. And so you'd get an email. And so I'm shifting all these books and I'm making a few cents here and there. They did. Amazon to this day, right, doesn't let you price track what used books costs, even though the data's there. And they don't let any of the further party service do it either. But you got to have balls.
You have balls when you create a company with Jeff Bezos sending you lawsuits.
Yeah, I mean, it works when you've got someone to play it off of, but they got so big they were no longer afraid of Google Books.
You strike me as a guy who's quite resilient. You said you've started like 10 different versions of companies, made $100,000 here, $200,000 here, some more. Some didn't make any. When you tackle companies and you face the inevitable problems that exist, what keeps you going? How do you handle bumps and bruises along the way?
So most of those companies were just me and my computer. So there's no costs, right? So if you make $500 in a month, $100 a month, or $50,000, your outgoing is the same. And I know other programmers who are on, let's say, like an app store, and they just they'll have 3, 4, 5, 6 apps, and then they make a living from that, and they have no outgoing costs other than just maintaining those apps. So that's the key thing. So if you Google why employees suck, I for a while was doing the rounds of public speaking, and I've got a whole thing about this. And a core thing is if you're actually a productive person who earns more than your salary, you should quit and you should charge the product of your labor, because employees, by definition, would earn less selling the fruit of their labor than they make from salary. Otherwise, they should quit. So companies hiring employees, usually just a terrible idea.
I came across that. I love that. I pulled a quote out. Your quote from it is stop selling their time. You're talking about employees.
Yeah.
Stop selling their time, which they're pricing too low, and sell the fruits of their labor instead.
Yeah. Yeah. If you find that you're looking down at your coworkers and you're like, I'm a 5Xer. Why am I here?
Yeah.
Leave. And you know what you'll find is the next day they will hire you back at twice your salary. It's what happened to me. I was 22 at Discovery Channel, and I got fired because of politics, internal politics. And the next day, so I was working like 60 hours a week. I was making $55,000 a year. My salary was like $35,000 a year, but I was working so much overtime to make some money. And then they fired me because of internal politics. And another department hires me back the next day at $80,000. Just doing like 35 hours a week. And I was like, why was I in that job? Because other divisions were like, that guy, if you're that guy, figure out who will pay you what you're worth.
Yeah, because you're spending your finite time. Of course, the fruits of your labor, like your labor, but the finite time. I'm hearing a sense that you really, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but think about how you're spending your time. This is that one resource that, tomorrow or yesterday we can never relive. Today we can never relive. When you think about spending your time, what is your relationship with that?
You can Google, there's a great commencement speech from Steve Jobs on this topic. And this isn't his words, but another great quote I like is, no one on a deathbed ever said, I wish I'd done less. I wish I'd seen fewer things. I wish I'd seen fewer countries. No one ever says that, right? So that's fair. I'm going to push back on that because I also, when I was in California, every day I was having lunch with somebody who was useful for my business. And I woke up one day and I realized I don't have any friends because I'm just like parceling out myself to these little micro tensions. And so I fired everybody and I made a list. It was really, really short list. It was like 3 or 4 people. And I'm like, this is who I'm going to spend my time with. And really reduce it and then actually have some quality with them. So that's the counterpoint to the other one, which is you can become Tim Ferriss and acquire too many skills to be too scattered.
Say that again?
You can become Tim Ferriss and have too many skills, too many things you can do, and be too scattered. Focus is good.
Yeah.
I mean, there's this other thing I noticed. I forget who the quote is but like, I saw it with Lyris it managed to last about 5 years before it completely vanished, which was more than most things do. But this guy who had the most Michelin star restaurants in the world. His name is Robuchon. And so he had the most restaurants, when you sum them all, most Michelin stars in the world, most celebrated chef of all time. And I was living in London, and the day he died, the next day they closed his London restaurant. It's like one day it lasted. And that guy was famous for building a resilient team. Like, that's why he was able to do it. And even in London, like his flagship's in Paris and he can't make it in London. Whoa. It's like, okay. And so my goal was like, can I build things that last 5 years after I leave? That's not a very big goal, but like 5 years, it's not a large horizon. Really, really, really hard, it turns out. And so you gotta plan on, like, every day, how do I get replaced with someone better? And how does the culture not shift?
I wrote down a quote from a writing of yours that really, it moved me. And it's along the lines you're talking about, but you said, a work lost is akin to erasing a person's very existence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's super cheesy, but there's a Star Trek Next Generation episode on this, where Picard gets zapped by a little alien probe, and he lives the entire life of a alien world that has now been destroyed. And they knew they were going to be destroyed. Their entire civilization would be erased. No one would ever heard of them. And they pool all their resources to sending out one probe that's going to go out there and touch one person, and that person will have that memory of that world. And that profoundly affected me, that Star Trek episode. And so that's when someone puts their life into a book, and then that book now goes out of print, it's like they never existed.
And that book meant everything to them when they were writing it.
They poured their entire life of competency into that, and it vanished. And there was a problem I really wanted to try and solve, and it's now been solved, which is great, which is, now that books were going away as a business model, how do people take the mastery of the end of their life and communicate that? And for a while, it looked like that was not going to happen, right? We lost books. There were without a business model, there's no distribution. It costs money to get the word out. And now there's a couple of variations. I mean, it's basically the YouTube model. But there's a bunch of companies trying to do these masterclass videos where they pour into it. I found this website in France, and it's just in French, which is kind of a shame. And they find the greatest French chefs right before they die, and they get them to share 10 recipes that they made in their life on camera, how to make it.
Oh,
and that's their test. That's their life right there, what they did. And it's only in French, not even dubbed. It's not subtitled. I was like, I found it, and it's obscure.
Yeah.
So I was trying to recreate one of the famous dishes of Robuchon at home.
How'd it go?
Took me about 6 months. I got the flavor. I didn't get the plating. So it's an egg. It's like a poached egg that's still creamy on the inside. It flares out with all this crunchy bits, which turns out to be Turkish pastry. And then there's a spoonful of caviar on the top. And there's like a sauce around it. So I figured out how to make the flavor, but I never managed to make the presentation. But I actually feel okay about that, because if you Google this, you'll find his restaurants all over the world still around. And most of the restaurants can't plate this well either. Like, it just doesn't look good. There's only a few restaurants that can make it. I'm sure it tastes just as good, but they can't. So I was like, that's a skill level I'll never have. But I'm really happy though that in 6 months I can acquire. It's just totally beyond me. I can't acquire that skill. Thank God.
Yeah. That's mastery. There's so much that's lost when people retire or pass on. I was interviewing someone, and they talked about how when they retire, they were a CEO or a high executive. They're like, right now, this business card can open any door I want. Tomorrow, when I retire, it won't be worth the price of the paper it's on.
That was me moving to Hong Kong. So I was in California. I was chairman of the board of the Electronic Frontier Foundation and ex-Creative Commons. on all the newspapers. I could call anyone. In fact, that was the reason I moved from Washington, D.C. to the Bay Area, because in D.C., I had a product, an earlier one, that I knew this company wanted, because the CEO had written me, sent me an email saying, I really want this product. And I couldn't get through the secretary. I'm like, I have the email, he said. The secretary's like, yeah, sure, whatever, kid. Couldn't get through. I'm like, that's DC. It's so frustrating. And eventually I met someone who was a CEO, and he said, in California, you can get through, and you just say, I need 5 minutes, the CEO's time, only 5 minutes, and I will leave. And the guy said, you'll get that from any CEO in the Bay Area. 5 minutes, but 5 minutes, you're out. You got your 5, they give you a chance. And a lot of the world won't give you a chance. I'm like, I got to go there. I got to go there where they give you a chance. And it was true. You totally can. If you make a good pitch by email, yes, I can put you on the calendar for 5 minutes. So I got there, and I tried to do manufacturing in the US. It doesn't work. That's a whole other conversation. You can't make, the only thing people can make stuff in the US are if you have Tesla-sized money and you do everything, right? Stainless steel in, cars out. Or if you're the military and you don't care how much it costs, then you can make in America. So I had to go to Asia where stuff is made. And here I'm an immigrant. I'm nobody. And I actually loved that. I really liked having to prove myself. Especially once you got the money, everyone and the reputation, everyone treats you really differently. And so being nobody again, I was like, okay, now it's just me and my skills.
There's the immigrant in you, back from the 10-year-old.
I think everyone who gets financially independent early has that stardom aspect, which is like, are they talking to me because I'm a star or because of my abilities? And that's why a lot of stars move to France where they're not stars, right? It's so that's what I end up doing. You sacrifice.
That's fascinating
because you can't raise money.
That sounds quite disorientating to your identity. Yeah. He says.
Do you have the chops or not? You can always tuck your tail in and go back home.
Yeah.
And well, that's as good as I was. I was a .com guy. I didn't have the chops to do this next thing. That's okay. I can live with that.
Hey, that's an important part. That's okay, though.
Yeah, it's okay. Turns out that was a hard problem and I wasn't up to it.
Right.
Okay. I'm glad I found my limit. It's much, much worse to be to have that. I could have been a contender. That's much worse. If only I had the guts. If only I tried harder. I could have been more. You don't want that on your deathbed. But it's I tried, and it turns out I gave it my best, and it turned out, no, I'm not the best boxer in the world, but I tried, and good.
Yeah. I really feel like you've got this strong mentality when it comes to whether that's enough or your self-identity. Just like you just said there, I tried and it didn't work. I read a piece of on, I can't remember where you wrote it, but you made a comment that people in Silicon Valley, or you said it's a dismal place except if you want to rule the world. And somehow it seems like, I'm sorry if that was a misquote.
No, it sounds like I probably would have said it. I probably had that belief at the time.
But there's somewhere in your belief system that had this level of enoughness, or I don't need to rule the world.
It was a pitch to get attention. So when I did BookMooch, for example, which is a book swapping website, and I had to get attention. So here's my pitch that I gave people. I didn't actually believe it, but I said it like I did. And I said, what's bigger than Amazon's centralized warehouse? Well, everybody in the world and their bookshelf. And they're like, ooh. I'm like, what's bigger than the world's biggest download site? I'm like, BitTorrent. Everybody's computer is bigger. And that's where the BitTorrent for books came. It's like distributed warehousing. That's what I told the businesses people, right? They're like, distributed warehousing. Whoa. Yeah, instead of centralized. Because at the time, Amazon was putting all their books in one location. And I'm like, I have distributed inventory and warehousing and fulfillment, and I don't even pay them. And they're like, whoa, that's so much bigger than Amazon. You're going to destroy Amazon. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to destroy Amazon. Right. And that's the story. That's the hook that gets people excited. I don't have to believe it, but I have to say it like I do.
That's interesting.
You have to be a megalomaniac in people's eyes if you're an American entrepreneur.
You got 5 minutes, right?
You got 5 minutes, you can destroy the world.
There's a lot underneath that statement there. John, you are an interesting individual. I see the time. You got a company to run and a life to live over there in Hong Kong. I got we're going to land this airplane here. I want to go back to just how you think about two things. Time and money. You've got a finite amount of time left. If you are writing a book on John's life, the past chapters we just talked about, the next chapter is about to begin. What would the title of that chapter be of John's life story right now?
That's a really easy one. I've wanted to write this book for a long time. It's called Entrepreneurial Warfare. How to negotiate from a position of weakness. So it's for the little guy out there.
Yeah. You seem like you've been always for the little guy with the music company, even the coffee. You're not trying to get to the, I don't know, just your approach around decent coffee. I can't remember the slogan for the music company, but I think it's something like "We're not evil."
That's exactly right. And it's in your head. You remembered it.
Yeah.
It's funny. It's arrogant. It makes you say, well, who is?
My brain thought that, but I didn't process that. Okay, so we got the chapter, which is wonderful. Now, how do these resources that everyone has, to some degree or another, fit in the next chapter? Time, money, and energy.
Yeah, so the book, Derek Sivers has done it, right? That's his life. He retired early and dumped his tremendous vibe and experience and made easy to read stories that let you go there. And there's a few others out there too, but that's Derek's life post selling his company. For me, what I really want is to try and have something that outlives me, and it outlives me in a way that I'm proud. It doesn't outlive me just because it makes money. And that's quite difficult. That's a much bigger mission than selling coffee machines.
Well, it seems like you're up for the challenge.
Trying every day.
Trying every day after you have that nice cup of coffee. The last question that I've asked everybody on the podcast is, John, let's imagine you're at end of life.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter how old you are. You're sitting on a front porch, looking out at a view that brings you complete peace, ease, and a feeling of content. You decide to bring out a notebook to write a message on what you learned was a key to living a meaningful life. What would be in that message?
Always be ready to die next year.
Always be ready to die next year. I like that. Well, that's a great place to end as you're chuckling. But that's nice. For me, I'm like, it reminds me of the finitude of time. It reminds me that time is all we really got.
You got to live well now. Even if you're working your brains out, if you're having a bad day, you got to figure out how to get out of that, because this might be all you got left.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate you sharing your story, your insights. I find you a very, very insightful individual with a lot of wisdom to share.
Thank you for having me, by the way. This has been a really great conversation.
Oh, I hope so. You're easy to talk to, and you're very interesting. Decent coffee. Can we get those in Canada and in the US?
You can get decent espresso, and yeah, lots of Canadians have it.
Oh, decent espresso. Sorry.
No worry. They have it about their house.
Are they wearing their toques when they make the espresso?
But yes, you can get it in Canada. You can get it wherever. There's this thing called UPS and FedEx. But we're not here to pimp my business. So
yeah, but it's interesting. I like your approach to how you're looking at this business.
Thanks very much.
But your story, I'm sure, has evoked a lot of things in our listeners. So thank you for your time.
Have a good day. See ya.
You too.